Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Maya Elinevsky, the Events and Outreach Manager here at the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. CMind, as we like to call it, is a global community of contemplative practitioners whose goal is the ongoing development of racial, social, economic, and environmental justice and the advancement of human flourishing. CMind's mission is to positively and progressively transform society through diverse contemplative practices. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's ACMHE webinar, Mindfulness in a Virtual World with Emily McRobbie. Dr. Emily McRobbie serves as co-department chair and assistant professor for the Adult and Higher Education program at the University of Southern Maine. She developed a new course for this online graduate program titled Mindfulness in Adult Learning. Her scholarship interests include mindfulness and contemplative pedagogy in education, transformative learning, and diversity. Emily also leads the Maine Mindfulness Network. We are so thrilled to be working with you, Emily, and with that, I hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to have you joining us today. I appreciate the opportunity for us to come together. A special thanks to Maya and Carrie and CMind for allowing this space for us to share. So I'll start today first by just sharing a little bit about who I am and the context for this work with you. Again, my name is Emily McRobbie. And I came to work in mindfulness kind of through yoga. I've been a yoga teacher since 2005 and found my way into this group and this scholarship community quite some time ago. And I feel like I just really enjoy with this work and connecting with you all. So to set the context for our presentation today and how this will go is I'll share a little bit of information. We'll have a little break for some questions. I'll do a short practice in the center, and then I'll come back and share a little bit more information and we'll have more time for questions at the end. To place the context for you, I do work for the University of Southern Maine, as already noted. We have 3 campuses. One is in Portland, Maine, another is in Gorham, Maine, where my office is, and a third one in Lewiston. And I'm in charge of running a particular program called Adult and Higher Education. We serve graduate students, and we offer a master's degree in adult and higher education. And we also offer a certificate of advanced studies in adult learning. And so the population of students that I work with tend to be early and mid-career. Many of them are interested in working in higher education and roles, perhaps in academic advising or student services or TRIO programs. Another group of our students are on a track to become adult education directors. And then a third group of our students enjoy working for nonprofits in community education, or perhaps in a human resources way to work with professional development or a corporate setting. We are completely an online program. So all of our courses are asynchronous online courses in our program, with the exception of one. And we call it a hybrid, but we meet with students via Zoom on certain Saturdays. So we work with students from kind of a wide geographic range. And many times we're connecting using Zoom or video conferencing with them. My intentions for our time together today is, first, I'd like to share with you a little bit about the planning process and the thought process that went in behind this course, titled Mindfulness in Adult Learning. Then I'll share with you the process of organization of content and practices, and along the way share a few tips or discoveries that I found to be really helpful that might also serve your work. And then towards the end, I ran a little study after the first time I offered this course to learn from students what their experiences were. So I received that student feedback and made some modifications. So I'll share that with you today. The planning process for this course, and I know there's a lot of text on this screen right now. We're actually going to start at the bottom of the screen where it says core concepts and work our way up. Was really, some thoughtful planning and time about What are the intentions of this course? How does it fit within our program? How does it fit within our university? And for us, our core concepts, I really wanted students to come away with a concept of what is mindfulness, be able to talk about it, explain it, and have their own experiences with it, and be introduced to many different authors who speak about this topic. The second goal was for them to gain a better understanding of what contemplative pedagogy is, and how this work might fit into adult learning settings. And our third core concept and goal was to really make some links and connections with diversity. Our students are very interested in diversity. They're very interested in equity and social justice issues. And our university as a whole has been doing a lot of work around this area. So we really wanted to build that piece into the course. Moving up to that middle tier that you see on your screen, we also wanted students to have the opportunity for a lot of first-person inquiry experiences in the course. So we did that in a number of ways. The course really was twofold. It had an academic purpose. It also had the purpose and focus to introduce mindfulness practices and encourage people to develop a daily practice. So students did keep a mindfulness log. They also kept a journal, mindfulness journal, and we participated in a number of discussions together. And then the third or top tier that you see on the screen right now, this was one of our middle core courses. And our middle core courses are designed to be practice focused or application focused. So we really wanted to give students the tools of how they might take this work out into their lives, and both personally and professionally. Towards the end of the course, students create either a lesson or a short activity. It can be a mindfulness practice that they write out with a script, or it could also be a first-person inquiry type of learning experience. We also do things like we have 1 week where they go out and practice mindful listening in their workspaces and in their personal lives, and then come back and share that with us. So the next step of the planning process was really selecting the readings, media clips, and various practices that we wanted to include in this online course. I say we, I should be saying I at this point. So one book that I found to be really helpful for our purposes, and you may be familiar with this book, and it's kind of backwards on your screen probably, but Daniel and Mirabai's book, Contemplative Practices in Higher Education. This book worked really well for our purposes since we were focused on content in those areas. I also wanted to expose students to a variety of authors and perspectives. And so I included a lot of other readings, chapters from books, scholarly articles throughout the course. And these are just a few samples of those. And I drew both from scholars and also meditation teachers. So one of the books that I love, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this one, John Yates's book called The Mind Illuminated, I found to be really helpful for my own understanding. So I pulled a chapter from there. I have a article by Arthur. I've got some work by Sharon Salzberg built into the course, and many others. And then I also found when I build an online course, I find that using video clips, media clips are really helpful so that they can hear information from other people in different formats and in different ways. So some of it comes in writing, but a lot comes to them through videos. And so I've got John Kabat-Zinn in there explaining mindfulness and some of his wonderful videos, Rhonda McGee, and many others. And then choosing practices for the course, I wanted to provide a lot of options for students. And very similarly to a mindfulness-based intervention and what we might see in MBSR or some of these other programs, I introduced several mindful movement options, mindful eating practice, the body scan practice, sound meditation, various sitting practices. And one thing that I would recommend moving forward is, and especially in an online course format, is finding practices that are of different lengths and time. So in a face-to-face setting, it's easy to you have a captive audience, you sit with people, you can do a 30-minute body scan. But I find that if I only put a 30-minute body scan video into the course, it's pretty easy for students to go, oh, I'm too busy, and I'll go through that quickly and maybe not do it at all. Excuse me. So I've looked for some that are only 5 and 10 minutes in length, and then some that are longer, because you'll have that variety to encourage students to engage. Later in the course, I introduce loving kindness meditation. Along the same lines, we do some things with self-forgiveness practice, self-compassion practices. We have a section in the course about nature. So I do a beholding nature practice, and have a video about forest bathing. So I introduce that. Students really seem to connect and enjoy that. And towards the end of the course, I introduce labyrinth walking, mandala work, some other things like that. So I even found online a labyrinth finder. So wherever students are, they can look up and see where the local ones. I encourage them to take themselves on a field trip and then come back and share their experience with us. So again, there's a lot of information on this screen, but I wanted to provide this in case you'd like to go back and look at this later. This is the basic organization of the course. I originally built this course as a 7-week summer class, which is not a lot of time to introduce both the academic piece of this as well as the mindfulness practice. So you don't have to read all of this right now. You can refer back. You can see, though, that planning process kind of come through in the more detailed steps. So in week 1 and 2, I'm introducing some of those core concepts, the mindfulness and the contemplative pedagogy. And then those are woven all the way through the rest of the course. Coming into weeks 3 and 4, I start to introduce them to, what are ways that this work might be integrated into adult learning settings, whether that be a classroom setting, an advising session, other ways, and provide examples. And then what are effective facilitation practices? I do note for students, in no way is this course designed to prepare them to be ready to really walk in and facilitate mindfulness if they're learning it for the first time. But I like to expose them to, what are the effective practices around facilitation, what is recommended. And then we talk about, if this is something you're interested in pursuing, here are some other training programs that can help take you down that road. Later on in the course, we dive more into those connections with diversity and embodiment of mindfulness in our lives. So I love this photo. I've used this a lot this year, and I can't tell you the source. I picked it up on social media, but I think it pretty well describes a lot of our lives in the last year and a half. Many of us suddenly found us working in these online and virtual spaces. And even though I'm lucky, I've been teaching online for about 15 years, our program was already online, it was pretty comfortable. I did feel a little nervous about, how do I put together a course on mindfulness in an online course format that's asynchronous and help people really have that deep experience? And really understand these concepts. So that was a question that followed me throughout this work. So a few highlights and things that I found to be helpful that I'll share with you today. The first is, I think when we're working in an online course or a virtual environment, we don't have the luxury of sitting with a group and watching all the nonverbal cues while they're engaging with this work. And so we really have to find other ways to connect with people and to invite them in and to create what I consider a safe space. So I start right away on the syllabus with people and include a special note. And that special note is honor yourself throughout this process. I disclose at the beginning, engaging in mindfulness practice is not easy. And for many of us, it can be a stretch. And then I've condensed the next sections, but I'll highlight them for you here. And these are things that I emphasize not only on the syllabus, but throughout the course repeatedly. Because when we're working in an online course environment, of course, we know people don't all read that one message on the syllabus, or they might not see it the one time we put it in the introductory materials. And so these are messages that I find myself repeating, writing over and over throughout the discussions, in our announcements, and in our Zoom sessions together. So the first one is, remember, this is invitational and you have choice. Find what works best for you. And that's why I try to include so many different practices for people to explore and become familiar with. And they do that. A lot of people who enter the course say, wow, I thought that mindfulness was really only sitting in meditation. And I thought, it wasn't for me because that's what it was. And once they get introduced to mindful movement practices or loving kindness practice or some of these other practices, they really start to find what works well for them. So that's a constant message. The second constant message is those attitudes of practice, right? Remain in that state of open awareness and use some discernment and understand what resistance is and how it can come up for us. So I try to talk with them a lot about these are practices that we just enter with open awareness. And you have to use discernment for yourself and recognize when I'm trying a new practice, is this just sort of a little bit of an irritation that I don't like? And I just have to sit with that discomfort of not liking perhaps, the sound that's coming through a sound meditation, or is this somehow causing harm, right? So if my knee hurts in practice, is it just a little irritation or is it causing harm and I should shift and move? That I think in an online world, we do it anyway in person, but online we have to do it over and over and over again with students. Many of my students will say things like, well, I didn't like that. I didn't like that. And so we kind of dive into that a little bit more and go down the road of, is it just a little bit of an irritation, it's a discomfort, or is it something that's triggering something within you? The third thing that I work with the students a lot on is that practice of self-compassion and patience with this unfolding journey. Self-compassion is a big one. I happen to work with graduate students, and they're wonderful. They're very dedicated people. They're high achievers. There are a lot of type A personalities among my student population. And I hear a lot in their discussions things like, I think I'm not doing it right. I'm not getting this right. Or just being hard on themselves. And so that message of self-compassion, that there is no right or wrong here. We're simply showing up for the practice to have an experience and observe the present moment, and whatever is there is fine. And there's no right or wrong here. And to treat themselves more gently, which a lot of them struggle with. A second thing that I found to work really well, and I know is present in many mindfulness-based interventions, is I did have students keep a mindfulness log, and also a journal. And students commented this was one of the best features of the class. It worked both for accountability and also for reflective purposes. So I gave them several different options. They could choose what format they wanted. They could even create their own format. I did ask them to log every day what they did, time of day, the length of their practice, and what practices they did. I did give the permission, we all have busy lives. If a day goes by and you don't practice, you can just write skip on your log, not a problem. And it was funny, one of my students this summer said to me, I didn't like the word skip. It made me feel bad. So I decided to use the word rest. I took a rest day. And I said, okay, that works. So that was kind of their own invention. I also invite them to journal at least 2 or 3 times a week about their practice. And this is really a chance to step back and for themselves kind of talk about what's going well, what's a challenge, what practices do they find themselves gravitating towards, which practices are they struggling with, any questions that come up. They also tend to make some nice connections with the content and also their personal lives here. So they do that. Some of my students actually journal every day. So they'll do their practice and then journal. Some of them do it a couple times a week. I do have them submit these. These are part of the course. So they do submit their mindfulness log and journal twice during the course. And this is a short course, so I have them turn it in at the end of week 3, partway through, and then again at the end. And again, this is more of an accountability piece. I don't grade them based on, and I tell them this, you're not graded on how much practice you did or what practices you did or how many days that's not what I'm grading. It's really just you're participating, you're keeping a log, you're keeping a journal, and they get credit for that. I also emphasize with them, they have control and choice over what they want to share from their journal. So if anything feels too private and they wish not to share it with me, they don't need to. They can choose what they turn in. So some of them do turn in their entire journal. They're very open about it. Others turn in samples from their journal during that period. And then some will write what I call a journal summary and kind of summarize briefly what they were talking about in their journal, whatever they would like to share. I accept all formats. The next thing that I thought I would share with you is I have found using guided videos in the course to be really helpful. This one may look familiar to you. This is Dave Potter sharing the raisin meditation that many of us are familiar with. And I found this on YouTube. It's available free. And one of the great things about using YouTube is that many of the videos are already closed captioned. So you already have that accessibility piece built in. And the students have said, these are great. These are really good because they're built into the course and they don't have to go searching for them. There aren't a lot of links to go to. They just click, click, click through, and then they can do it and then move on to the next page. And I find that works really well, and they're more willing to participate. I do share, with mindful eating, again, to be aware of their own history with that. And if it's not a comfortable practice, they're not required to do any practices. There are many different practices for them to choose from each week. And the other thing that I found to be really helpful, and it's not really part of an asynchronous online course, but it's a really nice support for it, is to offer more Zoom practice sessions where we do meet as a group. And so the first time I taught this course last summer, I offered 2 sessions. Overwhelmingly, the students said, offer more Zoom practice sessions. That was the best part. It was really nice to practice together. And we do it more like we would in person. I facilitate, and then afterwards we have the option to debrief and share our experiences together. So this summer I increased it and I've offered 4 sessions. So we do a Zoom practice every other week. This is optional because it's an asynchronous class, but I would say a half or more of the class show up for these. They really like them. And they're about an hour in length. This is a screenshot from the course. We use Brightspace, so this is what Brightspace looks like on the right. My only reason for sharing this is really on the left. The organization of the weekly modules is the same for every week throughout the course. And this is just good online course design practice, I think. I always start at the top with an overview. Here's what we're doing this week. Here are the readings for the week. These are the practices we're going to do this week, kind of an introductory page. Then it goes into content, and I usually have several links for content. Some are written, some are video clips. You can kind of see examples of that on the right-hand side. And then we move into the mindfulness practices. So I have an overview page. Here are the mindfulness practices with descriptions, and then that is followed by links, just like the raisin meditation that you just saw. So every week looks the same. And I think that helps students know, oh, the mindfulness practices are always going to show up halfway down, and then I can go look at those and then come back and look at the content. The end of each week, we do have an online discussion together. And this online discussion, most of them are in small groups. I do a whole group the very first week, once in the middle, and then once at the end again, we come back together. This is a class of about 20 people, which I find to be a big class in an online class. And I know some of you probably have bigger classes than that. And so I put them in groups of 6 or 7 for small group discussion. I think this helps create that safe space for them because they're not sharing with so many people, but they're sharing with their smaller group, and they stay with that smaller group throughout the whole course. They talk about their practices, how their practices are going. They discuss the content. They can ask questions. And I can interact with all 3 of the groups. So I have 3 right now. And at the end of each week, I just kind of pull the themes and share that with the whole class. That seems to work pretty well. And I'd like to pause for a moment. So what I've shared with you so far is kind of the basic planning and organization of the course. And I thought it might be nice at this point just to open it up, see if anybody has questions. We have a few minutes here for questions.
I have a question. Is it okay if I ask one?
Absolutely.
Emily, thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's just so exciting to see, how a course like this can look. I was just very struck and inspired by the fact that you embed diversity so early on. And so I would just love to hear more about that. It sounded like it definitely informs your curriculum in terms of diversifying sort of, the different practitioners and that sort of thing. But I'm curious about basically how exactly, like what kinds of connections you're making between mindfulness and diversity in the course. And thank you.
Sure, that's a great question. First of all, I'll say my definition of diversity is really a really big umbrella. So we start talking about diversity early on in terms of, everybody's different and everybody's an individual with these practices. And some people will gravitate to these practices and other people in this direction. So we kind of look at it from a learning preferences place first. We talk about accessibility. So we address people with disabilities and how you might work with them. And then I think it's in week 6, no, maybe week 5, I start to really make those connections with diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of Rhonda McGee's work has inspired me, and I've got a couple video clips from her in there in one of her readings. I've even thought about just adding her book right into the course as well. I've also got some pieces around trauma-informed practice, so we kind of include that. And I included one of the mindfulness practices is actually an anti-racist practice, a mindfulness anti-racist. And so there's a link there if they would like to try that. And it's a really rich discussion for people. Oh, and Charles Eisenstein, I included his work, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he kind of comes from the sustainability world, but he makes these really wonderful connections about interconnectedness in the world. And so it seemed to kind of fit in there nicely, and the students have some really rich discussions around it.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful.
Thanks.
And Emily, I just wanted to make sure you saw there were a few questions coming in through the chat as well.
Okay, let me open that.
Looks like folks would be really interested to see your syllabus for the course. If you
Absolutely. And I was going to mention that at the end. I would be more than happy to share my syllabus with everybody. So, and I've got my email at the end. I can share that out if you want to email me. That was one of the early things I did in my planning process. And I forgot to mention that. I went out and did a search for other people's work to try to see how other people were building a syllabus. And I found a lot of great examples through this organization, as well as just some that were posted out there online. And that kind of helped me think about what kind of learning outcomes should I develop for this course when I went through the curriculum process, and what kind of readings might work. So yes, I'd be happy to share that. Great.
And then one other question that came in was, what online platform do you use?
Great question. So we use Brightspace. And interestingly, we recently changed from Blackboard to Brightspace. So I'm using the Brightspace platform now. And I like it because it's easy to make those video links in it, similar to Canvas, if you work on that. All right, shall we continue? All right. I think what we'll do, if there are more questions, we're going to have more time at the end. We can open it up again.
Okay, perfect.
So I thought I would share with you today a very short practice, a sound practice This is a practice that I do in my first Zoom session with students. So it kind of introduces them to the idea of a sound practice or a sound meditation. If you would like to do this with us today, I invite you to join us. If for any reason you prefer not to do this practice with us, we honor that choice as well. And also your choice if you'd like to leave your video on during this or go off video for a moment and then come back later. That's your option. This will only be about 3 minutes or so long. It's a pretty short practice, maybe 4. And if you're doing the practice with us, I just invite you to take a comfortable seat, maybe ground feet into the floor in front of you. You might like to sit a little taller wherever you are, maybe even roll shoulders back and down to relax those shoulders for a bit. Some people during this practice like to close their eyes and go within and simply let the sound come in and fill that space. If that's comfortable for you to do so, you may. And if you prefer to keep your eyes open, you might like to focus on the photo on the screen right now, or on some other object, or just soften the gaze before you. So what I'll do in this practice is I'm going to ring these chimes 3 times. And just allow the sound to kind of wash over you or through you, and noticing all the difference, perhaps noticing the changes in the sound throughout, and also observing the silence at the end of each ring. If for any reason you can't hear this through the computer, or we have any kind of a sound disruption, you can simply turn your awareness to sounds in the room and listen there, or again, do a visual practice on the screen, just looking at the picture. Here we go. And perhaps staying with that state of observation of sound just a little bit longer, noticing the sounds around you right now and your space. Sounds that may be close or far away. And sitting with that open awareness, observation of the details. Maybe we can set aside for a moment our need to label or qualify the sounds, and simply letting them be there as they are. And we're slowly going to begin to bring this practice to a close. Gently returning awareness to the body, to your space. If eyes are closed, you may like to reopen and re-engage the sight. Taking your time, gentle transition. And when you feel ready, if you would like to rejoin the group, you can turn on videos if you wish. And just come back to our discussion time together. So this is a very short example. I do this early with the students in the course, and I find that the short practices at the beginning for beginners, they welcome. It feels to them, I think, a little more approachable. They're sometimes a little overwhelmed with a 20 or 30-minute practice. And we talk about how sound is such a great way to start. Sound is around us all the time, assuming one has all of their hearing capacity. Visuals are around us all the time too. So we talk about that. And that at any moment in time, we can simply pause in our day and listen, or pause in our day and look around and just kind of let that moment be there. So they really seem to enjoy that. I then also include in the course other sound practices, including one that's got, irritating sounds on purpose. And so they can have some very different experiences with it. I'll transition next and share with you just a little bit from the study that followed the course the first time that I offered it. I was really curious to see how this landed for students. And so I tend to be a qualitative researcher. I love to hear people's stories and what experiences they have and how they make sense of those experiences with mindfulness. So this is an interpretive case study that I sent up. If anybody still has their microphone off, they can mute. And the research design for this, I started with 2 research questions. So the first question is, how did participants engage with mindfulness practice following the course? One area I was very curious about, something we read a lot in the literature, is how much time and support do people need to really create a habit of mindfulness in their lives? And so I was really curious what happened after the course. Did they continue practice, and to what degree? The second research question was, what did graduate students experience in the online course and suggest for improvement? This was, I was curious what their experience was and what they wanted or what they thought would strengthen the course. So what we did was we started with everybody who completed the course was invited to participate in the study. Not all did choose to participate, but we had enough to move forward. And so the participants were asked 2 weeks after the course ended to answer some written questions that pointed to these research questions. And so we received some written responses about 2 weeks after the course. And then I worked with my graduate assistant, and she led interviews on Zoom 1 month after the course ended, and then again 3 months after the course ended. And I really wanted my graduate assistant to lead those interviews rather than me, because I was also the instructor for the course and wanted a little separation there. So she led those Zoom interviews and then transcribed them for us to take a look at the data. One of the findings that came out of this was pretty interesting and maybe not too surprising, but what was their practice over time following the course? And so the 1 month after the course, and we grouped participants into 2 groups. So some were brand new, had really never practiced mindfulness before taking the class, didn't have a regular habit of mindfulness in their lives, and they were still practicing 1 month after the course ended. They reported they were practicing anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes, 2 to 4 times a week. And I thought that was pretty good. It's like, wow, okay, that's really good to know that they were still trying to keep up with it. The other group, we put them in a group of having 2 years or more experience. Although I will share with you, at least one of these participants had as much experience as I did. She had been doing this for 20 years. So those people were practicing more, and they were practicing daily. So they reported they were practicing 20 to 40 minutes a day, every day. When we compare that with 3 months later, interestingly, those that were new to mindfulness had mostly stopped. So that wasn't a huge surprise to me, but it really does kind of, I think we're still wrestling with that question about how long should these support systems be in place to help people. So they had mostly stopped. They did say they would still periodically remember to practice, especially during times of stress. So they would tell me stories, or tell the graduate assistant stories about, well, I had a really stressful week, and then I remembered I should do mindfulness because it'll make me feel better. And so then they did try to plug it in for 10 or 15 minutes. Those that came in with prior experience were still steady, practicing 20 to 40 minutes daily. So what it told me was, the people that came into the course with prior experience really already had a solid practice established in their lives. And they came into the course, they learned some new things that supported that practice, and then they continued practicing afterwards. But for people brand new, they probably need a little bit more time and a little bit more long-term support. They also shared with me what worked and suggestions. What they said worked in the course well were the readings they felt supported understanding the concepts. They also appreciated having a variety of authors to provide multiple lenses to understand those same concepts. They really loved the inclusion of diversity, equity, and social justice connections. As I shared earlier, this particular population is naturally interested in that anyway. A lot of them want to work in higher education, and so much of this work is happening right now. So they really appreciated that connection. The Zoom practice sessions they noted as one of the strongest features. In fact, all of them said we should have more of them. The variety of mindfulness practices to choose from, as well as the different lengths of time they appreciated, so that they could really try a whole bunch of different things and then identify which ones they really felt comfortable using. They found the mindfulness log and journal for reflection very helpful, both for accountability as well as that chance to kind of step back and reflect about what was happening for them. And finally, they felt that there was a safe community for discussion. And that made me feel good. They did feel it was safe. It is a vulnerable kind of work to do together in an academic setting, but they did feel that sense of safety. They had suggestions to strengthen the course. The first one was longer time frame. All of them really said, I think it would be better if it were a full semester course, 12 to 14 weeks instead of the 7 weeks. It felt a little fast and a little rushed to them. And the second suggestion was to have more group Zoom sessions. They really felt that power of connection, and they felt that they understood the practices better after we did them together. So I did make some adjustments to the course. I'm teaching it again right now for the second time this summer. I am looking at a plan to extend the time frame. So that first course last summer was 7 weeks in length. We already had it on the schedule for this summer, and so I didn't have a lot of flexibility this year, but I did talk them into stretching it to 8 weeks for me just to give us a little bit more time. And then I've put it on the schedule for next spring. So we'll have a full 14-week course next spring, and I'd kind of like to do the same study again as a follow-up and see if it's similar or if there are different results. The second thing, I added additional Zoom practice sessions, and those seemed very powerful. We had 2 last summer. I offered 4 this summer, so 1 every other week. And I'm pretty sure for the 14-week class, I'll offer at least 7 and do it every other week. That seems to be a good amount of time to check in with people. And there was one more piece I added this year. In the first year, I had not included the trauma-informed practice information. This did not come from students because they didn't know about it, but I've learned a lot more about it in the last year, and I just felt it was an important addition to the course, so I did include some of that content. I thought I would leave you with some of the words from the students themselves. This came from the transcripts in their interviews, and so this is from their language. The first student shared with us, I think the biggest takeaway of the class is that mindfulness is a critically important skill for everyone. Here's another one. I'm more interested and aware of the ways in which mindfulness can be utilized in the conversations about racial justice. Another participant said, I saw my insights changing, and I thought that reflection was incredibly valuable, especially sitting with myself, being with myself a little bit every day in a new way. And one more comment. I regulate my physical self better because I've been able to pay attention more to how I'm showing up every day. Interestingly, in this class, this class appeared for students during the COVID-19 pandemic. There were also a lot of connections around that. Many of them said it really helped them during this time, and it gave them some tools to weather that a little bit. Here were some suggestions in general. If you are to take on developing a course like this, keep in mind those effective facilitation ideas that we all know when we're doing this with a group. How will we translate that into an online or virtual setting? And check in with students, keep it invitational, and do our own trauma-informed practices with people. Most of my students, I was lucky, they're graduate students, they're pretty mature. Many of them, if they needed a counselor during the past year, they had one in place. So I was kind of lucky that way. But I did know that we had counseling services to refer to people to if something came up. Introduce a variety of practices with different lengths of time for choice. The guided video and audio practices are great. They really loved those. And they also extended out and started finding their own. So they would do searches online and come back and say, oh, I found this. This one was great, and share it with each other. Some of them started using apps on their own. The virtual practice sessions, I use Zoom. You could use another video conferencing, seemed to be very helpful and supportive. The mindfulness log and journal, which we've talked about several times, was really helpful for both accountability and reflection. And keep in mind the importance of building that safe learning community, that this is vulnerable work, and it requires a certain amount of trust and comfort with one another. And that's the end of my formal sharing with you, but I'd like to open again. It looks like we have about 10 more minutes to ask questions or discuss. So, and here's my email at the bottom. So if you do have follow-up questions or would like to visit more, I'd be available and happy to do that with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Emily. So I am seeing a bunch of questions come in through the chat, which is great. Oh, and Jeremy has raised his hand. So I actually just want to make sure we get one of these earlier questions. There was one.
There's one here. There's one here about encountering administration or faculty resistance.
Yes, yeah.
That's a good one. Let me answer this. So I will consider myself lucky. So I've been on this journey of how do we introduce this into academic settings for a long time. And at my previous institution, it wasn't quite as easy as I found in my current institution. Although I'll backtrack a little, in my previous institution, I actually, because I'm already also a yoga teacher, I just started teaching yoga there too. So I was the academic person Monday through Thursday, and then on Friday I taught yoga, which was kind of a nice way for people to get more comfortable with these ideas. And in my current setting, I was lucky. Our particular program tends to have a pretty strong humanist philosophy and a little bit more interest in developing of the whole person. So we already had a course in our program named Spirituality in Higher Education, for example. We also had one related to the heart of the teacher and some of Parker Palmer's work. So it wasn't foreign to my colleagues. They were very comfortable with it. In fact, my senior colleague encouraged me to develop this course. So he kept after me, I want you to develop a mindfulness course. And I was nervous coming in as a first-year assistant professor to go down that road, but it turned out to be a very welcome thing and something that people were ready for, I think, at our university.
Thank you so much. I know that question comes up a lot. So Jeremy, you can feel free to unmute yourself and lower your hand.
Great, thanks, Emily. I just wondered if you might say a bit more about any ways that you found in how to guide the journaling process, especially in the earlier weeks. So do you experiment with different kinds of questions or prompts, or is there just a general guideline that applies to all the weeks? or ways of responding to students who ask you, what am I supposed to write here? And then also, do you have any approaches to offering comments in return after you read? Thanks.
Excellent questions. Thank you for those. Yes, I do provide, it's on the syllabus and it's also embedded in the course somewhere. I have a list of potential questions that they might use to guide the reflective journal process and tell them, choose any question you wish or do your own form of journaling. I also provide an example from my own journal early on in the first week, just to go, here's how I write about it, but you could write about it a different way. We did discuss it at the first Zoom session, and I had one student who said, I tend to like to draw pictures and write poetry. Is that okay? And I said, sure. So she has done some of that. So I've just remained very open-ended, but I did provide some examples and structure for people who might appreciate that or need that. In terms of responding to journals, I do read them, and I tend to respond based on whatever the individual seem. I think, I just follow my intuition with that, I think, more than anything, right? So if there are questions that come up, I try to answer those questions, or, if it comes up over and over in their journal that they're being hard on themselves and my mind keeps wandering, I try to reassure them and say, this is completely normal. Welcome to the human race. So we all of us experience that. I still experience it in my own practice. So I try to use that as that individual check-in opportunity with students. And then I do have a rubric. I do actually assign points for this, which I debate with, maybe it should just be like a check, satisfactory. I pretty much end up giving everybody full points. It's really more like, did you do your log? And did you do the journal? And if you did, then you get the full points for it.
Great, thanks a lot.
Emily, another question that came up in the chat and was echoed by others is where you found the anti-racist meditation?
I will have to go back and look for that again. I did a search for it online, and it was developed by two young women who were friends. It's really good. So let me search for that one, and I can try to somehow, maybe through you, Maya, make it available to folks.
Yeah, we'll be sending a follow-up email with the link to the recording, your slides, if that's all right with you, your syllabus, any other resources that we've mentioned already. And so that would be a perfect place to add that as well.
Sounds great.
Okay.
And I'm looking through the chat questions too. Somebody asked about the interview protocol so we used semi-structured questions. I did develop questions with my GA, and we practiced them together before she was pretty new to how to do those interviews. And then, so they were semi-structured, but still open-ended enough that we let people answer how they wished. They were open-ended questions, obviously. And we asked questions like, are you still practicing mindfulness? If so, what are you doing? What do you still remember from the course? What do you think was the most helpful thing in the course? Tell us a time in your life when you've applied this since the course ended, those kinds of questions. I hope that helps. And then we did transcribe all of those. So, oops. That's a little appendix for you. I'm going to come off the share screen.
It looks like we covered everything via chat. So if folks want to ask questions out loud, please feel free.
John Taylor, thank you for sharing the information by David. I attended his workshop this year, and it was great. And I highly recommend his work as well. All right, are there any other questions? Oh, great. And then somebody shared a nice link there too, as part of the anti-racism. So in the chat, there looks like there is a link to a meditation that has to do with anti-racism. Thank you for sharing that. All right.
Okay.
Got one more new message. Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming today and being here. I always look forward to opportunities to connect with all of you. I know all of you sometimes, I'm not sure how many of you sometimes we feel like an island unto ourselves in our workspaces. And so when I have the opportunity to connect with the CMind community, I just feel like it's a coming home and a chance to be together and share. I will share this. I've been really grateful and impressed by how much my students have been interested and engaged with this work. There feels to be a readiness to me. They're very interested. When I offered this course, I said, I don't know how many people are going to sign up for this. It filled immediately, and it filled a second time immediately this summer. And we're not a big program. We have somewhere between 70 and 90 students. And I've got a class of 20 right now. So it shows you the young people going into our adult learning fields are really interested in this work, and they see the benefit both to themselves and in their work working with other people moving forward. So I kind of feel like I took a risk developing this course. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it feels like it's planting seeds right now. And this next generation will be the ones to carry the work into the spaces.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. There's a lot of thanks coming in through the chat, so we'll be sure to share that with you, Emily. And thank you on behalf of CMind and ACMHE for offering this wonderful webinar today. Thank you everyone for joining us. And as I mentioned, we will be sending a follow-up email with lots of resources. We'll make sure to include everything that Emily mentioned today. And we hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you. Hope everybody has a wonderful day. Bye.